Welcome to the Mind Your Leadership podcast. And I'm happy to invite Charles Morris to talk with us and share with us his experience. Charles is a learning and development leader and mindfulness pioneer at Microsoft. He is the creator of Mindful Growth, a 4-day program built for Microsoft and designed to combine mindfulness and growth mindset. His approach to personal transformation blends his career experience in engineering leadership, graduate studies and research in secular mindfulness, deep personal experience in Tibetan Buddhism, and evolving interest in Carl Jung psychology. I actually met Charles at Wisdom 2.0 conference at San Francisco 2 years ago when I hosted a conversation about mindful leadership. That was really interesting. And I'm really curious to learn what evolved along these years from the last time we've met. So Charles, I'll be happy to hear from you. What is your personal connection to mindfulness? And if you can share with us your journey a little bit in order to know your story and background.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me. So my personal connection to mindfulness it really goes back to the year 2003, 2004, in that range, when I was a young adult, we'll say, back then, and really still in this process of discovering who I was, how to make sense of the world. And through that, at that time, I felt a strong connection to just a scientific materialistic viewpoint. You could say I was trained in computer science in my bachelor's degree. I just graduated, and felt like that made the world make sense. Mm-hmm. Until suddenly it didn't anymore. And I went through some personal experiences, relationships, other things that basically told me, like, wait a second, there's more to human existence, to human consciousness, to our experience here than can be explained purely through atoms and molecules. And through that, I do feel like I had a slight mystic bent all the way through childhood, but it's not particularly encouraged, especially in the West. Uh-huh. And so that part of me was kind of rekindled, and it led me on a journey through what some might call New Age literature, books like The Celestine Prophecy, eventually finding my way to Eckhart Tolle, mm-hmm. and his book, The Power of Now.
Excellent book.
Yes, excellent. And then through that, started to realize that a lot of these more kind of modern presentations were in some way based on Eastern philosophy, Eastern spirituality, and was directed at this book called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche. And so I picked up that book and really found a deep connection to what he was talking about, even though it was quite esoteric compared to a lot of other things I had read. And so through that, I really found a community, found a teacher in Seattle, where I'm living, mm-hmm. and basically became part of this international organization that was created by a Tibetan exile, a monk named Geshe Kelsang Gyatso. And, thus began my, long time personal exploration of Tibetan Buddhism, which eventually, I don't know how much we want to get into the whole story with the work world, but essentially for many years, it was separate, or at least as separate as something like that can be from my work life at Microsoft. I was already at Microsoft through this whole time. Mm-hmm. But I didn't feel like, I talk about it sometimes as my secret weapon for many years. So it helped me in a huge way survive, thrive there, be calm, be kind, be compassionate in an environment that doesn't always evoke that in me naturally. Until about 2016 or so, when we had a new CEO come on board. I know we're going to talk about him probably, and it suddenly became possible to talk about mindfulness in my actual work role. And that's when I began to study secular mindfulness. I did this master's degree at Lesley, did some research, and then eventually, over the course of a couple of years, transitioned out of engineering leadership and into human resources and learning and development, where I am now. And part of my charter here is to help figure out where mindfulness fits into the grand scheme of things for Microsoft.
Sounds amazing. So you said you lived like a double life, right? A personal life when you nourished with the spirituality and all the Buddhism and what you learned, and in the workplace you didn't feel like you can bring your whole self there, right? You brought only part of you. And it's amazing to hear when the new CEO, Nadle Satya, came, he enabled you to bring your whole self, to combine all the part of you and to bring them to fulfill them. That's really amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there was a huge feeling of kind of, here I am kind of thing, in a more full way. And I think the other interesting thing, for leaders listening perhaps, is that it's not like Satya ever pulled me aside and said, hey, I hear you've got this mindfulness practice. I want you to go do this work, go create this program. He gave me permission. I use this word sometimes, not in an explicit way, but simply through his example, through the words he was using, words like empathy, concepts like growth mindset, and he used them from a place that was clearly authentic from his side, that were spoken from the heart, that told me this was okay, this was the time for Microsoft.
Wow, it's really exciting to hear it, because it feels like beyond these words, you really it resonates within you. It's about time to bring your complete self and to fulfill this part in the workplace and to serve others from your abilities. So it's really, wow, I can feel this excitement that the moment it is here to step up and show up with your true colors, right? You don't need to hide anymore, kind of.
In other circles, in mythical or Jungian circles, people, we talk a lot about vocation and calling, and it certainly felt like a pull, an inner pull that I could not, it almost wasn't even a choice. It was like, okay, I have to do this. It may be a risk. It may not make, standard career sense in terms of the usual ladder that we think of climbing. But it was absolutely what I had to do.
Amazing. You talked about Satya Nadella, the Microsoft CEO, and I've read his book, Hit Refresh, when he talked about the growth mindset in Microsoft culture, which you implemented in your program. Can you share with us about this program and give us more information? I'm really curious to hear about the program and how it resonates in your culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so very early on in his tenure, Satya selected, well, first of all, he made culture the core part of his job, which not all leaders do, because culture can feel like this thing on the side that, oh yeah, and I have to think about the culture. But really my job is driving sales or driving technology or what have you, the quote unquote core business. But he realized, I think very correctly, and I think many leaders, he's obviously not the first one. There's Peter Drucker's famous quote of culture eats strategy for breakfast. But he truly took it to heart and realized that, you know, Microsoft is such an incredibly diverse business. He can't possibly understand and make it all happen on his own. But what he can do is create an environment, help create an environment where everyone can be at their best. And if he does that, then Microsoft and the world win.
Mm-hmm.
And so first thing was truly putting culture first. And then the second thing was really to select a concept or a framework to center this cultural transformation around. And for this, as you mentioned, he selected, or I'm guessing him and some advisors selected Professor Carol Dweck's concept of growth mindset, which is described in her book, quite famous book, Mindset.
Can you elaborate in a word about the concept that if people don't?
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, the essence of growth mindset is this idea. She has this quote early on in the book, and I'll paraphrase since I don't have it directly in front of me, but she essentially says, even though we as humans are different in many ways, and we all have our own innate qualities, we can all change and grow, even to our most basic qualities, through what she called application and experience. And so the real focus of her book was really getting people out of this mindset of, I am fill in the blank. I am good at fill in the blank. I am bad at fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
It's these labels, what she called fixed mindsets, that she really felt hindered us in so many ways in life. This is the way I do things. This is the way we do things.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of this conversation stopping type sentence that is just a label. And what she encouraged instead was the opposite, growth mindset. And one of the examples that really struck home for me as a parent was how we speak to children. Mm-hmm. Rather than saying things like, wow, you're really smart, or you're really talented at soccer. And so the story she tells was, if children hear this, oh, I'm really smart, or I'm a talented soccer player or musician, then they feel like that's just an innate part of who they are. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with having a connection, but they get this kind of fixed mindset about it naturally. And then what happens was, when they fail their first test, or they don't make their first sports team tryout, or don't win the music recital, it's like, what happened? I was told I was smart, etc. And so she goes on to basically describe how, if we just understand ourselves as constantly in evolution and adapt our language the way we relate to ourselves in that way, then there's amazing benefits.
Yes, I think regarding the fixed mindset, she also talked about the fact that if I'm smart, so I want to try again, because if I will fail, what does it mean?
Right.
So I won't try, so I don't try anything. And especially in this COVID-19 situation, pandemic, that we need to reinvent ourselves and to try new things and adapt and offer new offers to our clients, customer community. We need to adopt the new growth mindset. Otherwise, we will be not relevant. So
yeah, wonderful point. Yeah, if we hold to our identity, I mean, it's very closely, you can, even just in the way I'm talking about, you can start, in the way you're building on it, you can see how it relates to core mindfulness concepts around identity and self. Mm-hmm. And yet, to the degree we hold being smart or having a certain title, let's say in an organization, as who we are, then the less likely we are to embrace anything that might rock that boat, as we say, that might threaten that. Absolutely. Yeah. So and that leads pretty naturally into how I saw the connection between growth mindset and mindfulness. As I mentioned earlier, part of her description says, the way we evolve is through application and experience.
Mm-hmm.
However, she was, I think, rightfully so for how she was trying to frame the concept as a very broad concept. She doesn't say, and here is how you do it. Here's how you apply and get experience. And so that was my opportunity to look and say, oh, well, it's not that mindfulness is the only way to apply a growth mindset, but it certainly is a powerful way to apply growth mindset. When you think about application and experience, that's basically what mindfulness is about. It's about practice. It's about applying it in your daily life, gaining experience. And so I built on that and really said, okay, mindful growth, which is the name of the program that I created, is really, it really begins with growth mindset. In some ways, step one is relating to yourself as someone who's on a journey of discovery, of evolution, of growth. And then from there, it's really about gaining the tools, the knowledge, the neuroscience to understand how mindfulness-based practices can help you. And so part of what I do in this program, and is a passion of mine in general, is to talk about mindfulness as more than a wellness practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say that to minimize the importance of wellness, or, stress relief, just feeling better, kind of acute, treating some of our more acute experiences. However, I do worry that mindfulness, as it grows in popularity, gets pigeonholed or relegated only to that realm.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my personal experience, and I think if you look at its application more broadly, it goes beyond helping you feel better. That's often the first step. But eventually, as you go deeper and you follow maybe a different set of practices or just continue on your own path, you'll find that it starts to become inextricable from, again, a deep process of personal evolution and growth. And so that's what I really wanted to encapsulate into a program, to the extent that, of course, you can encapsulate such a huge concept into a program. And so that's where, part of what I wanted to present to people is, hey, this is a set of tools. There's the foundations that everyone kind of needs to know. But then beyond that, it's really, there's no one way to do mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
You can use it to develop many different qualities in you. You can use it in many different ways. It doesn't have to look like sitting on a cushion with your eyes closed.
That's all right. When I facilitate the MBL course in organization, like I offer there like 15 kinds of meditation, because I really believe that each and everyone will connect to each and everyone will connect to one tool that works for him, and that's amazing, because you don't really need to use all the tools. Also, I don't use all the tools, but one tool that I feel that works for me, and that's great. So like it's like an opening a window to this world, right? Because it's really a journey. As I see it, it's really a journey. I really agree with you that it's beyond only being calm and focused. It's also great, but it's beyond that. It's really transforming ourselves to be our best self we can be, and to fulfill our calling, and to bring our presence to the world. And then you see, I see it like being in the flow situation. So I'm also really focused and productive, but I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. And I really think it's the solution for the Y generation and the new generation that are really looking for meaningfulness in the day-to-day, not only to come to work. So I think, as you said, it's really encapsulates a lot of things, not only one thing. So it's really broad.
Yeah, great minds think alike. I put out 16 meditations, not to do one more than you, but we're right in the same ballpark. But yeah, I think you're right. And I'm glad you used the word meaning, because I think that's such a big part of what we're trying to bring to the modern work world. Not that it's been completely absent, but it's pretty obvious that a lot of our systems are not particularly geared towards helping people find and fulfill meaning. It's about productivity or, job descriptions, grades. You trace it all the way back through our education systems. Um, and the word that Satya started using that helped me go in that direction was purpose,
Mm-hmm.
which is also closely related. But I also talk about meaning and think that's an incredibly important concept, whether you use, whatever angle. I think they have a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
To start having that discussion in the workplace. But it's challenging. Back to our previous point, it gets us away from this idea that the way we work as a leader is to create job descriptions and find people who just fit, like, you're going to do what I say, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to like, well, let's have a dynamic conversation about what calls you, what's your purpose, where do you find meaning, and then how do we integrate that into the company's mission. But I think part of my belief is that if we do that well as leaders, then it's a win-win situation. You actually get more creativity, more, we just think about, you talked about flow and the level of creativity and ideas and work that comes out when someone's really in that state.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it benefits both the organization and the individual.
I agree with you, because this is also what I wrote in my book, and we really need to tailor today the jobs description according to the talent and the skill of the people. Maybe they finished fulfilling themselves in one job, but that now they want to go to the other one. So how the company makes them stay from a meaningful place and seeing what's the next step and how it can benefit the company, and then it's a win-win situation. So enable
Absolutely.
each and everyone to fulfill himself. And how people are reacting to your course? Do you hear something? People talking? They are going through an experience, through a transformation.
Yeah. I've had lots of amazing feedback. And so one thing I'll clarify about the program right now is that it is a self-selected program, what we call. Basically, people choose to come. It is quite in-depth.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a big commitment. And I feel like a big part of its success is that fact, is that the people who come to the program are the ones who have sought it out, found it, heard from their colleagues. It's almost a purely viral program at this point. And so I think that's part of why, the people are ready. Like, they want this and they've stepped into it. Some of the feedback, I think, that to me is the most energizing and inspiring is when people talk about the degree to which it's improved not just their work life, but their personal life. Quite often they actually start with their personal life.
Mm-hmm.
And how it's made them a better parent or partner, child to their parents. Um, it goes on and on. I think we all know the power of these practices when they are really taken in. And so then it became really a question to me of how to scale and what is the right way forward, and to not necessarily fall in love with my own program, so to speak, and say, oh, wow, I'm in this new position in learning and development.
Mm-hmm.
How can I use some of the budget or some of the political influence that I have now to like make it huge or hit some big number, as opposed to what is truly the right approach that's going to benefit others the most.
Mm-hmm. So you're still thinking about it. You don't have a solution, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's a simple answer to that program,
Yeah.
to that question. Sorry, for the program, my current direction is for mindful growth itself. I mean, because it is so in-depth and so mindfulness focused, my current direction is to build it as a community kind of decentralized program. So I'm in the process of training up more facilitators, creating facilitation materials so that we can basically grow organically. But then, on the other side of my job, there are opportunities to talk about mindfulness concepts or integrate mindfulness concepts into more broadly scaled programs. And I think one of the things, I'm sure you've discovered in your work as well is that the word mindfulness doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah.
And yet the concepts are universal enough that we can bring them in, not in a kind of subversive or malicious way, but in a way that is more acceptable to more people using different words. And so, for example, we have a practice at Microsoft that we train all of our managers in called press pause and zoom out. It's a very friendly language. It's about catching yourself in that moment when you're very reactive. From a neuroscience perspective, we talk about, being in a fight or flight state, amygdala hijack, all that stuff. But it wraps it up in this very kind of simple concept that doesn't feel like, oh, I need to take on some dogma, which is sometimes what people get when they hear the word mindfulness. Similarly, one more example really quick is we are in the process of creating a program to help people communicate in a way that's aligned to our company values. And to do that, we're bringing in the nonviolent communication framework.
Yeah.
And as soon as you don't have to go too far into NVC to start to see a lot of mindfulness type concepts, really need for deep self-awareness, for empathy. So again, ways to bring in concepts, even ways to practice. And, maybe also starting to bring some core mindfulness practices in more broadly as well.
Yes, I really agree with you. I also had a conversation today with the academia that wants to bring it, but they don't like them term mindfulness. So it was also the same conversation we had. Okay, we can bring it without saying the mindfulness, and maybe we are bringing the core meditation practices, but you can bring it in other channels in an authentic manner, but in a way that it will resonate. And I also agree with you, like in my MBL course, it's also my assumption that people need to choose to come to this course because, the essence of mindfulness is this free choice. Otherwise, it's contradicts
doesn't work.
The mindfulness. So, but it's great that it goes organic, and this is the way it goes because as I see it, when people going through the course, from my experience, they are going through a transformation. It's amazing because then you don't need people feel something different and they want also to come. And I agree with you that it also starts with the personal aspect. People at my course, one of the participants stopped smoking, and I saw him 6 months afterwards, and I was afraid to ask him if he still doesn't smoke, but I asked him, and he didn't. And another person stopped smoking. It was really, wow, amazing. I said, wow, it really had an impact on him. It's, it's really beyond the calm and the focus and the productivity. It really transforms people, and then it really goes organic. I think this is the way to bring it. I agree with you. So it resonates deeper in the culture.
Yeah, probably one of my most humbling pieces of feedback was someone who came back and basically said that their marriage was falling apart. And through this program, he's been able to repair that relationship. And that was just incredibly humbling to be a part of that. I tried to share that he did the work, and I just helped to provide a little. He was ready.
Wow, it's really touching and inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate about the need for mindfulness during these challenging times of COVID-19, racial tension in the US?
Yeah, I think actually this this touches really well into what we were talking earlier, which is, COVID has, to me, there's two sides to COVID. Well, there's many sides to COVID, but for this discussion, maybe I'll stick to two. One is it's kind of the triggering nature of it. Whether that is because we are now surrounded by our family all of the time, whether we had a bunch of plans that were canceled, whether we're seeing things on the news of people doing things that we disagree with. It has this kind of, triggering nature to put us again into this stressed state. And so there's kind of this immediate need, and at Microsoft and elsewhere, I've seen this upswell of like, oh wow, now we need mindfulness. And so I think that's kind of the obvious piece where it can be helpful. I think the less obvious piece is, again, a little bit what we talked about earlier, which is once we pull back from the grief and all of the other emotions that come with the immediate reaction, I think we can step into a space of viewing COVID as an incredible opportunity. I mean, if we would have asked ourselves what it would have taken to just stop. I mean, I know not everything is stopped, especially those of us who can do our jobs virtually, but in many ways it feels like life has stopped. Mm-hmm. And I talked about press pause and zoom out earlier. It's kind of like a global press pause.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, I think it's very important to not rush towards getting back to quote unquote normal, or getting back to the closest thing to normal that we can come back to. And really facing that unknown, that fear. You talked about it earlier as a leader, that risk. I think fear is probably the core emotion, state of being that we need to be able to sink into, because usually when there's this much change, if we don't have some of these self-management tools, then there's more than enough uncertainty. And so we want to lock down and make everything that we can control the way we like it, the way they used to be. And so it takes something more courageous to take all of that fear, all of that uncertainty, and add more through exploring possibilities, questions that are now coming up that maybe were not in our realm of consciousness prior to COVID, and do that despite the fact that adding even more change might add more uncertainty and fear into ourselves, maybe even our organizations in the short term. Mm-hmm. But really to understand that it's a liminal moment between, the old and the new. And I think our training can really help us to explore and not, of course, change things for the sake of it, but to really be courageous in this moment to think about what we want the new world to look like.
Great. I agree with you. I think it's a powerful worldwide to really think, retreat from the day as we know it in order to come back differently.
Yeah. And maybe I'll touch really briefly on, you mentioned the racial tension in the US in particular, but of course has become a global phenomenon as well. To me, again, many different ways to talk about this, but maybe to just touch on one key one that I think mindfulness can really help us with, which is empathy. And in particular, I think there's this temptation, this ease to fall into a certain camp, a certain side of the debate. And we are, sometimes people use this phrase, we are on the right side of history. And that means everyone who doesn't agree is wrong, is in some form the enemy, to be convinced, to be overpowered. As opposed to, true empathy. And I think a lot of the training that some of the deeper mindfulness practices get us to around what we call othering. Hopefully this makes sense to your listeners, but essentially our tendency to view others as separate from ourselves, unrelated, unconnected. This phenomenon, even if we are quote unquote right, I mean, what does that even mean? It's not, we will never come to a place of peace and understanding with that fundamental posture of needing to overpower or needing to convince, as opposed to truly being empathetic, seeing the interconnectedness, seeing the essential goodness in others as well, no matter how they may be showing up in a moment. And starting from that place, starting from a place of curiosity, of conversation, of connectedness, which is extremely hard. I can say these words, but if you find yourself in a position with someone who is potentially angry and says things that you just completely disagree with, but I think because it is so challenging, that's why we need training. We need practices that bring this kind of mindset as deeply into our being as possible, so that when we're faced with those moments, we have the best chance to rise to the occasion.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I agree that it's really challenging to be empathic and compassion, because it can trigger us in our own places. I think this is the practice, actually.
Yes, hugely.
Feeling these feelings and being able not to be managed by them, and to take a deep breath and connect to the broader picture, to try to see beyond what the person is saying, from where he's saying it, and what he's saying. So I think at the end of the day, it's a daily practice, and sometimes we succeed and sometimes we fail, because you are human. Right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, failure is a huge part of the process, and that's, to maybe bring our conversation full circle, that's a huge part of what Carol Dweck encourages as part of growth mindset as well, is like seeing failure as wonderful, actually celebrating it, understanding how it will help you
Develop.
Be better next time.
Yep, great. And this way we can grow and go forward. Otherwise, we stuck in our own place and don't change. Charles, it was really interesting for me to hear your thoughts and insights. It's really touched me, and really excited that you're doing this amazing work in the world, in Microsoft and in the United States. Do you have something else you want to share with us, for conclusion, before we wrap up?
I think mostly just thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a very interesting time and opportunity. Maybe if there are fellow mindfulness practitioners and people doing this kind of work in organizations, maybe I'll say a little something for this community, which is, I feel like, and this is reflecting what a lot of how I speak to myself, which is to not be satisfied with just getting the word out there or getting people to close their eyes, or take a deep breath, which is wonderful compared to where corporate life or organizational life was 10 or 20 years ago. But to really continue in much of the vein that we've been talking about, the opportunity that this moment is bringing us to really not just be satisfied with using mindfulness to help people feel better in the current system as it's constructed, the current institutions, but to really use it as a force to then build on that foundation of well-being to evolve, to push forward into something different, which is going to take everyone. It's not just going to be the leaders. It's going to be everyone who needs to step into that. So no matter where we are, there's something for us to do.
I think what you say, that each and every one of us is a leader.
Exactly.
For his own and for the community. So it's really show up and take responsibility and to take this opportunity to grow and evolve as individuals and the community. So
find our own edge.
Yeah. So I'm really happy for this conversation. I really hope that we'll be able to meet next Wisdom 2.0 conference. You know,
we'll see. Yeah, hopefully not on a screen.
Yeah. So, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Karen. Me too. Yeah, appreciate the invitation.